Today we're going to sew this poof of a purse that looks vaguely like a hair scrunchie when the drawstrings are pulled the whole way closed. It's fast, it's fun, it's a beginner-friendly sewing project that might be just the thing you need to go with your handmade outfit. I'm Christy from Wholecloth Patterns. You can find more of my bag sewing patterns and video tutorials right here on YouTube and at wholeclothpatterns.com. Today I'm going to sew an Annin Scrunchie Bag. This design first appeared in Tauko Magazine issue 17. You can now buy the standalone PDF pattern from my pattern shop and from the Tauko website. This video is free to everyone for information or entertainment, but if you want to follow along, you'll need a copy of the pattern, and I'll link to all the ways that you can buy it in the notes below the video. The Annin bag has a long, thin strap that can easily be adjusted to wear it as a shoulder bag or across the body. The straps are attached with a simple fabric loop, and then the end of each strap is knotted to hold it in place. The bag is fully lined and makes a single compartment. The open edge of the bag has a little pleat along the side seam, and that allows the bag to hold its fluffy, puffy, scrunchy shape when the drawstrings are pulled to close it. The whole bag is made of fabric, so you can easily make it with scraps from a larger project or something that you have in your stash. The ideal fabric for the Annin bag would be a medium weight woven that has a crisp structure to really hold the volume of the gathers. You could use a lightweight canvas, a lighter weight denim, a medium weight linen. Anything that is about 6 to 8 ounces per yard works well for this bag. You could also try fusing some interfacing to the wrong side of a lighter weight fabric if you wanted to try it as the main fabric for the bag. This bag is made with lightweight corduroy, and I think it's about 5 ounces per yard. So even though the fabric is on the lighter side, the texture of the corduroy gives the fabric the perfect body for this bag. And for the lining fabric, you want to use any lightweight woven fabric, something that's around 4 ounces per yard. You can find links to my suggested fabrics on the Wholecloth Patterns website. This is a measure and cut pattern. All of the pattern pieces are rectangles and the dimensions are listed in the pattern. You could make paper templates, pin them to your fabric, and then cut around them, or you could just measure and cut right on the fabric. I've got my fabric all cut out, so let's get started. I'm starting with my bag fabrics already cut out. I have the 2 pieces for the body, the 2 pieces for the lining. Here are 2 drawstrings, both of my strap loops, the strap, and here I have my gathering guides. You don't actually see the gathering guides on the bag, they're on the inside, so I just cut them out of some scrap fabric. The only requirement for this fabric would be that you can't see them through either of your other fabrics. The first thing we're going to sew are the drawstring and the straps. The technique for these 2 pieces is exactly the same, they're just a little bit of a different width. So we want to start by making a long fold down the length of each piece toward the wrong side. So I'm just folding them in half with the wrong sides together, and I'm going to press this crease in place. We're going to open it back up and make another fold along the whole length of the fabric toward the wrong side. And this time we're folding one of these long edges to that middle fold. And then I want to press this fold into the whole length of the fabric, and I'm going to be careful not to press out the fold that we just made. So there's my second fold, and I'm just going to iron all of my creases one more time so that they're really well set. And then I'm going to open it up again and repeat those steps with the other long edge of the fabric. So here is one of my shaped drawstrings. You can see the folds that I've made in the fabric. So now I'm ready to do the same thing to the other drawstring and to both of my straps. Here are my folded straps and my folded drawstrings. Now we're going to sew along the whole length of each one of these strips of fabric. I like to stay about 1/8 of an inch from the open side. Here are my finished drawstrings and straps. And you can see how I sewed them close to the open edge. Now I'm just going to set these aside and I'm going to assemble the strap loops. To make the strap loops, we're just going to fold each one in half with the right sides together, aligning the short edges. And then we're going to sew along this edge. Because this pattern was originally published in a European sewing magazine, all of the dimensions are maximized for metric. But if you're sewing with an American sewing machine that uses inches, you can go ahead and round the seam allowance up to 1/2 inch. It won't make any difference in the finished bag. Next, we're going to press open these seams. I'm going to grade mine a little bit because I'm using a pretty thick fabric. Next, we'll turn each of these little tubes that we've made right side out. And I can usually get these with just my fingers, but it's helpful if you have a chopstick or a knitting needle that you can use to help turn them. Next, I'm going to position the seam so it's more or less in the middle of one side, and I'll press each tube flat. Now I'm going to fold it one more time, aligning the short ends with the seam concealed in the middle. And I'm just going to pin these in place like this and set them aside until we're ready to attach them to the bag. Now we're ready to sew the lining to the body. So here I have one body piece and one lining piece. And I'm going to align the longer edge of the lining with the short edge of the body piece. And of course, these are the same length with right sides together. My lining is a yarn dyed woven, so it's the same on both sides. But you can see here I have the right side of my main fabric, and I am using a directional print. If you're using a directional print, you'll want to attach your lining at what will be the top edge of the bag. So I'm just going to pin along this edge, and then I'll sew on both sides of the bag. And maybe you've noticed I haven't really been pinning anything so far because I'm using corduroy that has this fuzzy nap. It kind of sticks together on its own, so I really don't need very many pins. Next, I'm ready to sew along this seam. Now that we've sewn this seam, we're going to press the seam allowance toward the lining. Now we're ready to mark where the drawstring opening will be along the side of the bag. I'm going to make my markings on the back of the fabric, because when I'm sewing the seam, that's the side that I'll be looking at. Once again, this pattern is maximized for metric measurements, so if you're using inches, you have to convert a decimal. I'm going to save you a few steps and just tell you what the fractional dimensions are. So we're going to measure from this seam down along the body of the bag on each side. The first mark will be at 6 7/8, and then we'll make another mark 1 1/8 further down. And again, if you're using centimeters, just go ahead and use what's in the pattern. Now we're ready to attach our strap loop. So I've turned the fabric back over so I have the right side facing. We'll position each strap loop along the side of the body fabric aligned with this seam. And actually, I like to hold mine down about 1/8 of an inch or a couple of millimeters from that seam. It just makes it a tiny bit easier to sew around them when we're sewing the channel for the drawstring. So I'm going to pin those and then I'm going to baste them in place. The strap loops are basted to the body of my fabric. Now we're going to set up the gathering stitches at either end of each body piece. We're going to run 2 rows of basting stitches down each short end of these bag pieces, and you want to stop 1 inch from each side. So we're going to leave a 1 inch gap, sew our line of basting, and stop 1 inch from the other end. So I've set up the gathering stitches on all 4 ends of my bag. I'm not going to gather them just yet. First, we will sew the side seams of the bag together. So I'm going to position the 2 sides of my bag so that right sides are together. And here I have my markings for the drawstring opening. I'm going to keep that side up so that I can see where it is. I'm going to align these long sides and pin along the length of each side. I've pinned the 2 sides together. Now we're ready to sew along each side of the bag. But there are a couple of places where we don't want to sew. So between the 2 marks for the drawstring opening, we want to stop at each of those marks and leave this portion between them open. So I usually just put a pin parallel to the seam just to remind myself when I'm sewing not to sew that section. So we'll have an opening at each side on the main fabric for the drawstring opening. And I'm also going to leave an opening in the side seam at the lining so that I have a space to turn the bag right side out. And I was also careful to hold the basting stitches out of the way so that I'm not sewing over them when I sew the side seams. So we've sewn the side seam with the openings at the drawstring and to turn the bag later, and I backstitched at the beginning and end of each of those lines of stitching. Now we're ready to gather each end of the bag. And to do that, we're going to use the gathering guide. It's just a strip of fabric that helps us get the right length at both ends of the bag. And then after we sew it, because it's just gathering stitches at each end, it reinforces those bottom seams. So I like to start by finding the center point of my gathering guide, and I'm going to put a pin in that. And then I want to find the center point of each side of my bag, and I'm going to put a pin in each side. So as you can see, to do that, I just fold the bag in half and put a pin in the middle. So I'm going to start with one layer of one side of the bag. I like to gather each side of the bag separately. Then when you sew them together, you get a nicer rumpled, irregular gather at the bottom, and that's the look that I'm going for. I'm going to align the centers of the gathering guide and the body of the bag, and I've pinned the guide to the fabric. Then I'm just going to pull on the end of the threads of my gathering stitches and gather one side of this piece of fabric. And I'll know when to stop when the side of the bag is the same length as the gathering guide. I'm going to pin the end of my guide to the end of the bag. And then I like to kind of even out the gathers so I get gathering along as much of the bottom as I possibly can. And I'm going to pin that in place. And now I'm going to repeat that with the other half of this side. So here is one gathered end, and I'm just going to repeat that with the other side of the bag. Next, we'll repeat this step with the lining end of the bag. Now we're going to sew the seams along each end of the bag. Now I'm going to remove the gathering stitches. And usually, because these are so loosely sewn, you can just pull them out by one of the ends. At this point, I'm going to press open the side seams just so it's a little bit neater looking when we turn the bag right side out. We're going to turn the bag right side out through this opening that we left in the lining. As I do this, I'm going to loosely shape the gathered ends of the bag. And even though we started with rectangles that had square corners, I'm not going to poke out the corners. I want to let them naturally be kind of rounded off by the gathering stitches. Once I'm happy with the overall shape of the ends of the bag, I can go ahead and sew closed the opening that we left in the lining. Now I'm going to tuck the main fabric side down into the lining side of the bag, so the bag is basically wrong side out. I'm going to position this fold so that there's 4 inches of the main fabric above the lining. I've loosely pinned this 4-inch fold in place, and I'm just going to check on the right side. I want this seam between the main fabric and the lining fabric to be running just below the drawstring opening. So here's my drawstring opening. I'm just going to set a pin at the bottom of that opening so I can see on the other side where it is. So that looks pretty close. Here is the pin at the bottom of my drawstring opening, and I'm just a little bit past it, and that's okay. Next, I'm going to sew the drawstring channel with the bag turned wrong side out like it is here. For the first line of the drawstring channel, I'm just going to stitch in the ditch right along this seam line the whole way around the bag. And then I'm going to make another line of stitching that is 1 1/8 inches above that, again, the whole way around the bag. And as I'm sewing around, I'm going to fold the strap loops out of the way so that I can sew below them and then above them. This next step is the most essential one to giving this bag its unique shape, but it's also the hardest one to describe in a few simple drawings and some text. So I'm hoping that by showing how I make it, it will really demystify this little step. Here's a finished bag, and you can see on this bag we have just this simple fold at the top, which would be totally fine if we just left it like this. But when you gather it, it kind of just makes a flat ruffle. And to get the scrunchy look at the top of the bag, you want something that will kind of hold this flat fold in a more irregular shape. So I've added a little pleat at each side. So we just put a little line of stitching here to hold this fold off center. And then when you pull the drawstrings to close the bag, it makes this more three-dimensional scrunchy shape. I'm going to start by putting a pin along the fold at the bag opening, and I'm going to do it just above one of the side seams. And I want the pin to run parallel to the fold. So I'm marking the fold with the pin, and I'm only pinning through one layer of fabric. So this is just going to show me where that center line is around the top of the bag. And then I'm going to pull out the two sides of the fold, and then I want to align this pin with the seam down below. So the pin will be resting on top of that seam. And basically all we're doing is dividing this flat fold into two halves. And I'm just going to put a pin in it to hold it in place. And I'm going to repeat that on the other side seam. Now I'm ready to just sew a few stitches along this side seam on each side to tack down this pleat. So here's my tacked down pleat that I sewed along each side seam, and you can already see how it's transformed the shape at the top of the bag. Now we're ready to insert the drawstrings. So I've just attached a safety pin to the end of one of the drawstrings. I'm going to slide it into the drawstring opening, and I'm going to guide it around the bag. And I want the drawstring to enter and exit at the same opening. I'm going to tie a knot at each end of this drawstring. Now I'll repeat this with the other drawstring. So there are the drawstrings. Now we're ready to install the straps. I'm going to turn the bag wrong side out for that. We want to insert one end of the strap through the strap loop. And I usually use the safety pin again to help guide it through. Now I'll tie a knot in the end of the strap to hold it in place. Now I'll repeat that with the other strap and the other strap loop. Now I'll turn the bag right side out again. So I have these two sides of the strap, but they're not connected. And to connect them, I'm going to use the Fisherman's knot, which is a really simple way to make a strap that's adjustable. So I'm going to kind of position these as if they were connected, and then you tie a knot with one end of the strap that goes around the other side of the strap. So here I have one strap end, and I'm going to put it behind the strap, wrap it around, and then I'm going to tie a knot. So I have it wrapped around, and then this end goes through the loop that I've made. So the knot that I'm tying is going around the strap. And then I'll pull it tight. Now I'm going to repeat this with the other end and tie a knot around the other side of the strap. And as I'm tying the knot, I want to be sure that I'm inserting the end of the strap from top to bottom so that the strap end is pointing down toward the ground and the bag. Now that both knots are tied, you can see that I can either slide the knots closer together, and that makes the strap longer, or if I slide the knots further apart, that shortens the strap. So this way you can either wear it as a shoulder bag or across your body. And now we're all finished with our Annin Scrunchie Bag. Thanks for sewing along with me today. Be sure to let me know in the comments if you make an Annin bag, and you can share your finished bags on Instagram. Be sure to click subscribe for more video tutorials and sew-alongs from the Wholecloth Patterns sewing channel.